The church bells had not even stopped ringing when Alara Whitmore decided she would rather starve than marry a stranger for money. She stood outside the tall oak doors of Ashcombe Hall, her wedding dress heavy on her shoulders, her hands cold despite the summer air. Inside, her father waited with a signed contract that promised her future to a man she had met only once. She had agreed to nothing. Yet here she was, dressed for a wedding she did not choose. Her father's voice echoed in her memory from the night before. He had told her the family had no choice. Debts had piled up for years, and the Duke of Ashcombe was the only man willing to erase them. In exchange, he wanted a wife. Not love, not partnership, just a name on a paper and a woman who would stay quiet. Alara walked through the doors anyway. She told herself she would find a way out before the vows were spoken. But when she saw Lucian Ashworth standing at the altar, calm and unreadable, something in her chest tightened. He did not look like a man forcing a marriage. He looked like a man who had already given up on wanting anything at all. Their first real conversation happened only minutes before the ceremony began. He spoke plainly, without warmth, telling her the marriage would be simple if she did not ask questions. She did not answer him. Instead, she studied his eyes, searching for the cruelty she expected to find. She found something else instead: exhaustion, the kind that comes from carrying a secret too long. A servant passed by and whispered to another, not realizing Alara could hear. The words were quiet but sharp enough to cut through her nerves. This was not the Duke's first wedding. His first wife had disappeared from public life not long after her marriage, and no one ever spoke her name again. Alara's pulse quickened. She glanced at Lucian, who showed no reaction, as if he had heard the whisper 100 times before and learned to ignore it. She wanted to ask him directly, but the priest was already calling the guests to their seats. Time had run out. Her father took her arm to lead her down the aisle. She could feel his hand trembling, though his face stayed proud and composed. She realized then that he was afraid too, afraid of the man he had chosen for her, but more afraid of losing everything if the wedding did not happen. As they reached the altar, Lucian offered his hand. Alara hesitated for one long breath before taking it. His grip was steady, but his eyes flickered with something unspoken, something that felt almost like a warning. She did not know yet what she was walking into, but every instinct told her this marriage was not what it seemed. And as the priest opened his book to begin the ceremony, Alara understood one thing clearly. Whatever happened next, she would not stay silent. The hall fell quiet as the priest raised his hand to begin the vows. Guests packed every bench, their eyes fixed on the couple standing at the altar. Alara felt the weight of their stares, each one judging her, measuring her worth against the fortune she was said to be saving her family from losing. Lucian stood beside her, composed as ever, though Alara noticed the slight tension in his jaw. When the priest reached the part of the ceremony that addressed the dowry, the entire room seemed to lean forward. This was tradition in their world, a public declaration meant to remind everyone of a bride's value or her family's shame if the payment fell short. Before her father could speak, Lucian raised his hand and addressed the crowd himself. He announced that he would accept no dowry at all, framing it as a generous gift to a family in need. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some guests smiled, impressed by his apparent kindness. Alara did not smile. She understood immediately what he had done. He had not freed her family from debt out of mercy. He had bound her to him publicly, in front of everyone who mattered, making her gratitude a debt of its own. Anger rose in her chest, sharp and sudden. She thought of the whispered words about his first wife, the woman who vanished from society without explanation. She thought of her father's trembling hands, the contract she never agreed to, and the years of being treated like property to be traded away. In that moment, something inside her refused to bend any further. She reached up and pulled the veil from her head. The fabric slipped through her fingers as she stepped back from the altar. Every eye in the hall widened in shock. Even the priest paused, his book still open in his hands. Alara looked directly at Lucian, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. She told him to keep his dowry, that she would not be owned twice, once by her father's debts and once by his so-called charity. Then she let the veil fall from her hands, letting it drop at his feet like a discarded promise. The silence that followed felt endless. Guests exchanged startled glances, unsure whether to gasp or applaud her courage. Her father's face turned pale, caught between horror and something that looked almost like pride. Lucien did not move. He stared at the veil on the floor, then slowly lifted his gaze to meet hers. For a moment, Alara thought she saw something shift behind his composed expression, not anger but recognition. As if her words had struck a place he rarely allowed anyone to touch. Before he could respond, she turned and walked down the aisle alone, leaving the hall behind her, leaving the whispers and the shocked faces, leaving the life that had been chosen for her without her consent. She did not know what would happen next, but she knew she would never regret the moment she finally spoke for herself. News of the wedding spread through the county faster than Alara could have imagined. By morning, every household seemed to know her name, though the story they told was not the one she had lived. People whispered that she was ungrateful, that she had humiliated a good man who offered her family salvation. No one spoke of the debt that trapped her, or the public display that turned generosity into a leash. Her father arranged for her to stay at their old countryside cottage while lawyers discussed what to do next. The estate felt colder than she remembered, its walls holding memories of a simpler time before debt and desperation changed everything. Alara spent her days staring out the window, replaying the wedding in her mind, wondering if she had made a mistake or the bravest choice of her life. Rather than sit in doubt, she decided to search for answers. She thought about the whispered words from the servant, the mystery surrounding Lucien's first wife. She wrote letters to old acquaintances, visited neighboring estates, and listened carefully to every rumor she could find. Slowly, a different story began to take shape, one far more complicated than simple cruelty. She learned that Lucien's first wife had also agreed to a public dowry waiver, believing it to be a kind gesture. But rival families used the unusual arrangement against her, spreading rumors that the marriage was never legitimate, that she had married for money rather than love. The pressure grew unbearable, and she withdrew from public life entirely, her reputation destroyed by a gesture meant to help her. Alara sat with this information for a long time, her anger softening into something more complicated. She realized Lucien's actions at the wedding were not calculated cruelty, but a repeated mistake born from fear and grief, a pattern he had never learned to break. Meanwhile, across the county, Lucien faced his own reckoning. Alara's public rejection had humiliated him in front of everyone he answered to, yet he found himself unable to feel true anger toward her. Her words replayed in his mind constantly, sharp and honest, in a way no one had spoken to him in years. He began to question his own intentions, wondering if his generosity had ever truly been generosity at all, or simply another way of controlling the women in his life without acknowledging it. Late one evening, unable to ignore the pull any longer, he made a decision that surprised even himself. He would go to Alara, not with lawyers or demands, but with the truth she deserved to hear. He did not know if she would listen, or if the damage between them was already too great to repair. But for the first time since his first marriage ended in silence, he wanted to try honesty instead of control. Lucien arrived at the countryside cottage without warning, his carriage stopping outside just as the sun began to set. Alara watched him approach from her window, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and curiosity she could not fully explain. She opened the door before he could knock, her expression guarded but steady. He did not offer excuses or demands. Instead, he told her about his first wife, about the public dowry waiver that had once seemed like kindness, but became a weapon in the hands of people eager to destroy her reputation. He admitted that he had repeated the same gesture with Alara without fully understanding why, only realizing now that fear had guided his choice more than generosity ever had. Alara listened carefully, her arms crossed, her mind working through everything he said. When he finished, she did not offer comfort. Instead, she led him to the small study where she had gathered documents over the past weeks, financial records she had quietly obtained from mutual acquaintances. She revealed that his estate was far from as secure as everyone believed, that his own finances were strained nearly as much as her father's had been. Lucian stared at the papers in silence, stunned by how thoroughly she had uncovered the truth he had hidden even from himself. For the first time, he saw Alara not as a bride to be rescued or controlled, but as an equal capable of seeing through him completely. There was no anger in her voice when she spoke next, only clarity. She told him that kindness without honesty was simply another form of control, and that if he truly wanted to make things right, he needed to speak with her as an equal instead of deciding what was best for her from a distance. Lucian nodded slowly, something shifting behind his eyes, a quiet acknowledgement that she was right. They talked long into the night, discussing not just the wedding, but the expectations placed on both of them by families desperate to survive. Alara spoke of her frustration at being treated as property, while Lucian confessed the loneliness of carrying his first wife's fate as a secret shame he never allowed himself to process. By the time he left the cottage, something between them had changed. It was not resolved, and Alara still felt cautious about trusting him fully, but for the first time since the wedding, she saw a version of Lucian who seemed willing to listen rather than command. As his carriage disappeared down the road, she wondered if perhaps there was a way forward that neither of them had considered before, one built on truth instead of debt. The hearing to formally end the marriage was set to take place within days, drawing attention from every corner of the county. People gathered outside the courthouse long before the doors opened, eager to witness the conclusion of a scandal that had captivated them for weeks. Alara arrived dressed simply, her expression calm despite the crowd's curious stares. Inside, she faced the same officials and witnesses who had watched her throw the veil at Lucian's feet. This time, however, she did not come to walk away in silence. She had spent the previous days considering every possibility, weighing the freedom of leaving against the chance of building something entirely new, something equal, something honest. When given the opportunity to speak, Alara stood before the room and addressed them directly. She explained that she would not accept a marriage built on hidden debts or public displays meant to control her. Instead, she proposed new terms, terms that placed her name equally on the estate's documents, gave her direct control over shared finances, and required a public correction of the story that had painted her as ungrateful rather than honest. The room fell silent as she finished speaking. All eyes turned toward Lucian, waiting for his response. He rose slowly, his expression steady, and agreed to every condition without hesitation. He addressed the crowd himself, correcting the narrative they had believed for weeks, stating clearly that Alara was not rescued by his generosity, but his equal in every sense that mattered. Gasps and murmurs spread through the courthouse, though this time they carried a different tone, something closer to respect than judgment. Alara's father watched from the back of the room, his eyes filled with quiet relief as he realized his daughter had not only survived the scandal but reshaped it entirely on her own terms. As the hearing concluded, Alara and Lucian stepped outside together, facing the same crowd that had once watched her humiliation. This time, there was no veil thrown in anger. Instead, she lifted the same veil she had once discarded and placed it gently over her own shoulders, a quiet symbol that she was choosing this path herself, not being forced into it by tradition or fear. Lucian offered his hand, and this time, Alara took it without hesitation. Together they walked forward, no longer strangers bound by a contract neither of them wanted, but two people who had faced the truth and chosen honesty over control. The crowd watched in stunned silence, witnessing not the end of a scandal, but the beginning of something neither of them had expected to find.